I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Imperial Bedrooms by Bret Easton Ellis. Now, Imperial Bedrooms is a sequel of sorts to Bret Easton Ellis's first novel, Less Than Zero. Now, I say this book is a sequel, but at the same time, I'm not really sure if you can call this a full-fledged sequel to Less Than Zero, or just another book that happens to feature the same characters from Less Than Zero. Now, all of Ellis's books are essentially set within the same universe. For example, the character of Clay from Less Than Zero briefly showed up in Ellis's second novel, The Rules of Attraction, and in The Rules of Attraction, there was a character named Sean Bateman who would show up in Ellis's third novel, American Psycho, and the main character of American Psycho, Patrick Bateman, was Sean Bateman's brother. And I haven't read Glamorama yet, but I believe two of the main characters in The Rules of Attraction also show up in Glamorama, and also in The Informers, a lot of characters from American Psycho show up in The Informers, and this book actually kind of connects to Ellis's novel Lunar Park, but I'll explain how this connects to Lunar Park in a little bit. But basically all of Ellis's books take place within the same world, so really I don't know if you can call this a sequel or really just another book that happens to feature the same character. Now, another reason why I wouldn't call this a full-fledged sequel to Less Than Zero is because in a lot of ways this is a very, very different book than Less Than Zero. Like, it has a very different feel than Less Than Zero. Now, I love Less Than Zero. Less Than Zero is probably one of my top 10 favorite novels of all time, but Less Than Zero, for all intents and purposes, really didn't have a plot line, but this book actually does have a plot line. Now, Less Than Zero, it's really hard to classify Less Than Zero, but this book I would actually classify as a thriller, so it really is a very different book than Less Than Zero. It just happens to feature the same characters. Now, the plot of Imperial Bedrooms is it's set 20-something years after the events of Less Than Zero were supposed to happen, and in the book, Clay is now in his 40s, I believe, and in the book you find out that Clay is now a pretty successful screenwriter, and he has come back to Los Angeles to do this movie called The Listeners, but in the book he develops a relationship with this actress named Rain, and he really wants Rain to be in this movie, The Listeners, but she's really not the best actress in the world, but he really wants her for the part because you realize in the book that he's really, really attracted to her, and what happens is throughout the book, Clay starts getting these text messages from somebody who's claiming to be watching him, and so you realize in the book that somebody's stalking Clay, and you don't know who it is, and and also in the book, Clay runs into a lot of his old friends who were also characters in Less Than Zero. Like, he runs into Blair, he runs into his old friend Julian, and he runs into his friend Rip, and in the book you find out that Rip and Julian are involved with some pretty sleazy shit, and that's really all I want to say about the plot line of this book. Now, I mentioned how this book kind of connects to Lunar Park. The reason I say this book kind of connects to Lunar Park is because in Lunar Park, Bret Easton Ellis made himself the main character of that book, and in the beginning of this book, it kind of breaks the fourth wall when you find out that Less Than Zero is actually a book within this universe. Like, you find out in the beginning of the book that somebody that Clay knew actually wrote a book about about him and published it as fiction, and obviously that book is Less Than Zero, and the author of that book is Bret Easton Ellis, and in Lunar Park, Bret Easton Ellis already made himself a character within his own fictional universe, so that's why I say I feel like this book kind of loosely connects to Lunar Park. But in the beginning of the book, when you find out that Less Than Zero is actually a book within this universe, like, you find out that Clay basically knew Bret Easton Ellis, and Ellis wrote a book about him. You also get references to the movie that was made off Less Than Zero, which I thought was pretty interesting. Now, one major difference between this book and Less Than Zero is, in Less Than Zero, it was really hard to determine whether Clay was a good or bad character. Like, in my opinion, in the first book, Clay was a character who you neither rooted for nor against. Like, he was a character who, in my opinion, was neither good nor bad. In this book, though, it's pretty easy to determine that Clay is a pretty bad guy, especially when you see what he does at the end of the book. You really kind of hate the character of Clay, but that's kind of supposed to be the point of Ellis's novels. Like, in most of his novels, you really don't care about the characters. Like, in most of Ellis's novels, the characters are pretty bad people, but that's kind of the point of his books. Now, this book is definitely not for everybody, but that kind of goes with all of Ellis's novels. Like, Ellis's books are really not for everybody, but personally I like it, and, I liked Imperial Bedrooms for the most part, and I can definitely say that if you liked Ellis's other novels, I would recommend giving this book a read. However, this book definitely didn't make as much of an impact on me as Less Than Zero did. Like, as I said earlier in this review, Less Than Zero is probably one of my top 10 favorite novels of all time. This book is good, but it's nowhere near as good as Less Than Zero, in my opinion. But that's it. That's my review on Imperial Bedrooms by Bret Easton Ellis, and bye.